Kenyan. So I'm a co-founder. I'm a founder and CEO of a company known as Harriet's Botanicals, where we retail traditional indigenous medicine sourced from the Southern Rift Valley for the urban African population and the diaspora. So yesterday when I was listening to Njali talk about his grandfather who was in the Mau Mau, I wish I could tell you a similar story, but mine is completely different because my grandfather and his brothers all were police in the colonial administration. Actually, my grandfather himself was the driver for the governor. And that enabled him to take my mother to school, and my mother by the age of 7 was actually in boarding school, and she speaks fondly of a lady called Mrs. King. So my mother was already taken away from the village very early, an outlier. She's a graduate. I'm second generation graduate. She was the first Kipsigis woman to get an upper second class in business, unheard of at the time. And then on my father's side, again, another outlier. My late father was an economist with 5 degrees, a PhD, and he worked for government. So I myself, I went to university in London at London School of Economics. I have 2 degrees, my master's in international banking and finance law, and I worked in derivatives, exotics, deep credit default swaps, all that stuff that was happening in 2008. I was actually in the thick of it at the time at JP Morgan before going to Goldman Sachs. So why I tell you this story is I really want to emphasize the fact that I had this Western education. I am the role model colonial subject, so to speak, and I had ticked all the boxes except one. So I suffer from a condition called endometriosis, which was undiagnosed at the time. So because I had good health insurance, I was living in London, and I had access to doctors. I was in and out of hospitals, including surgery. I went through the whole gamut of being told there's nothing wrong with you. But what used to happen to me every single month for 10 days in the office was an absolute nightmare. And that included mood swings, breathing pain, vomiting. And at the time, I used to feel as if I'm not quite fitting in because I was a serious go-getter. I wanted to succeed. I wanted to be like all those people you see on Wall Street. I was going to be the first Kipsigis woman on Wall Street. But that didn't really happen as planned. I kept getting sick, and that is how I sort of like got very familiar with the alternative practitioners, Reiki, yoga, anything else you can think of. I knew it. I knew about like essential oils, I knew about flower essences. I actually went on courses for all those. That is how I discovered how to make medicine. I used to make tablets out of herbs. I even, experimented with magic mushrooms for pain. I used to go to all the alternative sites, and that is when I really got familiar with the apothecary tradition of Europe. So time went on, and this was a long time ago because I was working in 2000, 2008, thereabouts, and a little bit later, and my problems with my periods actually started before that. So we're talking over 20 years. Now in 2017, my father passed, and I was home, and before we left, this lady said to me, in Kiswahili, utanyesha, which means you are going to have a period. So on the day you're burying your father, make sure you've carried a lot of information, but it has a context. So actually that day, first thing in the morning, like at 6, I was in a lot of pain, and it's like literally I couldn't move, so the funeral could not continue. So as I came out, like kind of hobbling, because now you're in so much pain, you're just kind of like hobbling. This woman approached me, and she was my auntie, like my mom's cousin, and she said to me, "Oh, we now know what the problem is. Tomorrow we're going to bring you medicine." And she said dawa in Kiswahili, and I was amused, but yes. So she brought me this medicine, and for the first time in my life, I had a painless period. So I took it back to Nairobi, and I gave it to my friend who was on her way to a hysterectomy. And then she canceled her hysterectomy, like everything stabilized. And this is how this thing exploded. Now, because traditional medicine in Kenya has a big stigma, and actually most people think when you do this kind of work, you're what we call a mchawi, you're a witch. And we have the Witchcraft Act of 1959, which outlawed all practicing of medicine by Africans. So most people just think that you're like a contortionist of sort. And I remember my friends would call me Amiti Shambares, like like somebody who deals with meaty trees. And I think when that person was giving me that name, it was derogatory, but I embraced it because I was now having a good time, endo wasn't a problem for me anymore. And it's like the number of people who started coming to me just directly. I heard you have a cure for this. I heard you can alleviate my period pain. And this particular product we discovered, it's called Arrowweight, because we kept the traditional names for a reason. I'll talk a little more about that. Like it deals with conditions like endometriosis, adenomyosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, painful menses, primary infertility, secondary infertility, and menopause as well, because it has a hormonal component. So this product exploded, and we were just selling and selling and selling. Up until now, we have 3,000 customers every single month. We sell in the diaspora, we sell in Australia, we sell in America, we sell in Saudi Arabia, we sell in all of Kenya. We have 11 outlets. This happened all in 3 years. And in that time, I got the patents, I got the copyrights, and I engaged the lawyer. I grew a team. I have 20 employees. And in the villages where we source from, we have up to 300 people working at any given time in community engagement programs, because we must make sure that the trees remain, that they are harvested sustainably, and that we replant them. So what has this got to do with sort of communities and the forest? So first I was telling you the story of how I came full circle from where I was, from an investment banker to Amity Shambares, which I am very proud of now. I mean, Miti Shamba brought me here. I mean, investment banking would have never brought me here. And I was sort of really intrigued by the fact that why Iceland? And the first thing I noticed when I came here is these natural wellness products that the country has managed to monetize and commercialize, but in a gentle way, so that value remains here. People don't lose. These things are not destroyed because people are using them, or that you're not exporting them until there's nothing left here. So I think my anti-colonial approach to nature, especially with the indigenous forest, is naming the trees in the traditional language, because that means that the people in those communities understand this is so valuable, we don't cut it down for chocolate. So as an example, for one tree, Prunus africana is very famous. You may have heard about it because it is used to treat prostate cancer, especially in Europe. So what happened in the 70s, some Africans colluded with some Europeans to actually destroy forests because of this Prunus africana. And it's extremely valuable. It's worth billions in the market. But the strange thing is that the Africans themselves, who are living in the forest, didn't even know. They just saw long people coming and taking away trees and trees and trees. And they didn't know that the value in Europe was unbelievable. And you can imagine how that money would have transformed that community if people had known. So we then keep the traditional name of Prunus africana is tenduate. In Kikuyu, it is moiri. So we have a program where we identify trees in different communities. So we say, we have it, you have it, they have it, we all have it. So don't cut your tree down for charcoal, which is, you'll get $80. But if you keep your tree and sell it to us, you will get $20,000 for the year. In any given year, we'll use 2 trees to service all those customers. So then we have a tree planting program to make sure that in 1,000 years, we're going to find the trees as they are. So even as we speak about sort of ancestral memory, it's intriguing for me the fact that my grandfather's brother, who was also the chief at the time, because my community is syncretic. When I say syncretic, it means we can embrace Christianity and African traditional religion. Like we're Christians at the top, but over here, we're African spiritualists. So he was a spiritualist. I got to know later. And even this auntie also is like a pseudo-spiritualist. And funny enough, then the tradition was passed on to me. So I speak about, like ancestral memory. What does it really mean? How is this knowledge passed? And how do you then, so there's a big spiritual component in African traditional medicine. Actually, most people, I do have clients who say to me, until you speak to me and say, you will heal, I don't believe I will heal. I'll give them the product, here's the product. And they say, no, will I get well? And I say, of course you will, it's scientific. And they'll say, no, will I get well? And then I say, yes, you'll get well. And that sort of eases the burden for everybody, because to be honest, it's not that I know for sure. Actually, I don't know what will happen, but you must give out some type And that is sort of like the psychological and the psychic way, Africans interact with traditional medicine. And you'll be surprised to find that 80% of Africans on the continent are using traditional medicine, but under the cover. So in a sense, it's like they use it, but not really tell the authorities about it. And then worst case scenario, they'll go to hospital. So what we must do is bring the medicine out so that everybody can use it. So now we talk about, I can quickly go through my slides.